Get ready for the world's greatest Arsenal podcast. Welcome to another podcast by Guns and Yellow Ribbons. Enjoy the show.
Hello, welcome to the show. My name is Fergus. This is number 4 of our summer series of Arsenal history, the way it was. Joined, as always, by old man Trev and the very informative Andy and Mark, who are Arsenal authors and historians. Really enjoying these series. The last one was Chapman. This one is going to be really interesting. A different era. We're looking at Arsenal history, 1935 to 1953. Really do hope you enjoy the show. If you like it, tell your friends about it. Click subscribe and share with it. Mark, how are you doing?
Okay, sir. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good. Did you enjoy the football on Wednesday night? Is it coming?
Nah.
Andy, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Fergus. Yeah, and I, even as someone who's not particularly interested in international football, I quite enjoyed the other night as well, and looking forward to Sunday.
I am too, and I don't have a horse in the race, but I'm grabbing on the coattails of the English now. So I do love a pizza, but not that much. Trev, another T-shirt, another day. I've even got one of your old cast-offs.
Yeah, I'm passing them on to you. I'm looking forward to this very much, Fergus. It's not. I'm not very up to date on this era. It's like a gap in mine for some reason, and so I'm looking forward to Andy and Mark putting us some facts across to us on a few things. Do you know what? Talking about international football before we move on, I'd lost all faith in international football. Wasn't really bothered about it. Not interested. But I've got to give this tournament credit where it's due. Credit where it's due. It has reignited my interest a bit, and that's not just because England are through to the final. I think that the standard of football has been pretty good, and the standard of refereeing has been better than we've been used to in the Premier League. I think although we've still got a lot of cheating going on, the refs are definitely trying to have a little bit of a crackdown on it. I think VAR has been used sensibly and much better than it has been in the Premier League, and it's made the game easier to watch. So, yeah, I'm into it. I think we had a great 1-1 win the other night in the semi-final. I'm hoping
you would lead judges together, you know that.
I'm hoping we win the next one 3-3 in the final, mate. So, yeah, it's reignited my faith in international football. I'm enjoying it, mate.
Right, so if anybody wants to check out what Andy and Mark do, the Arsenal history, telling it the way it really was, is their website. They've got links to the books and a lot of the facts and stuff that we're going to talk about today. We don't pre-warn the guys what we're going to talk about. I try and cobble together a few bits and pieces, and we put them on the spot, really. So they don't really know what we're going to ask. They know the era. And then it's just, it's almost like a mastermind of Arsenal, specialist subject, 1935 to 1953. I've started, so I'll finish. Before we do finish, the one thing where we finished off on the last one was the Herbert Chapman era. Now, on the 6th of January, 1934, Herbert Chapman died of pneumonia. He was quite fit and active leading up to that beforehand, Andy. I think he'd been at a game or looking at games, so it was quite a sudden death, wasn't it?
I'm not sure how fit he was. I mean, he was getting on, sort of like in his mid-50s, but and he was quite a portly chap as well. So I think he wasn't an overly fit person. But yeah, he'd been to see the third team play against Guildford a few days before, and then he came down quite quickly with pneumonia, and it was very sudden. And the morning that he died. He died in the morning, on a Saturday morning, and Arsenal actually played that afternoon, which is like astounding. That would never happen today, would it?
No, it'd be about 16 weeks a morning, wouldn't there, or something like that?
Yeah.
So, and flags and armbands and everything else. Which, listen, a mark of respect, yeah, but it sometimes goes over the top. Listen, this was the Highbury before the East Stand was built. This was the North Bank, the South, the Clock End, and the West Stand that Chapman commissioned. But he also commissioned the new East Stand, the Marble Halls, and this is the construction of the Marble Halls, and that opened in 1936. 36 and 35, 36. Mark, do you want to talk a bit about, the East Stand and what it must have looked like? I suppose if you compare it to modern times, like the way the Emirates must look like in comparison to some of the older stadiums, like say maybe Turf Moor in comparison to the Emirates, the facilities and what we had on offer there. Do you reckon that it intimidated visiting fans, Mark?
I don't know, really. It might have done. I tend to think. If you look back when teams were intimidated, from my personal memory, I remember teams being intimidated by Liverpool, but they weren't necessarily intimidated by the stadium; they were intimidated by the team. So if your team's strong, you're gonna think you're gonna lose a game from the start. And if you think about it, it was built in '36. Okay, we won the league 2 years later, in '38. But as Andy was saying, last week, we were on the slide effectively. We weren't the great team that we had been in the early 30s. We were still a really good team, but we weren't a great team. And I'm not convinced that the surroundings play a huge part in that. It's all how the team's made up, basically. The question people, I saw someone asking the question is, why have England been absolutely appalling since '66? And all of a sudden, we're good. I know it's going away, but it's more of a team, isn't it? It's more of a team thing than the environment. They've had fantastic training facilities for England for 30 odd years. Arsenal had great training facilities. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to transport it onto the pitch.
So, Mark, we go into decline, for want of a better phrase. Well, maybe after Chapman dies, right? After Chapman unfortunately passes, we go into a bit of a decline. We win the league in '38, and then we go into a bit of a decline. Is that because Chapman isn't there anymore?
No, as we've already said. Allison won the same number of trophies that Chapman won, and Whittaker after him. They both won 2 leagues and 1 FA Cup. So there wasn't. It was. I suppose because he wasn't there, it was different. But Allison was a different type of manager. He was more of a showman. He was more. What's the word for it? Hollywood than Chapman was. Chapman was football, and Allison was a bit more rounded in that respect. Is that he knew about football, but football wasn't really his main interest. His main interest was the media, which he utilised to huge amounts. Going into the Second World War and stuff.
And I think also there was Alex James was coming to the end of his career, and he was the linchpin in the team. He was like the man that all of the game went through. Him and Bastian on the left wing. So James was coming to the end of his career. He was in his mid to late 30s, and he left he retired in 1937, and Arsenal didn't replace him before the war. So that was one of they were just about getting through with him in the team, but he almost didn't make the 1936 Cup final. And we won the league in 37-38 by the skin of our teeth.
Yeah,
so, and Andy, with the unveiling of the new stand and stuff like that, the facilities in there would have been state of the art. Would that given us any? I know what Mark said about like the team and the players and so on, but would that given us any advantage or any leverage to win those leagues by the skin of our teeth or whatever? What's your thoughts on that?
I think more than anything, it probably impressed the other teams that would come and play at Highbury. I think if you've ever been down there, you go into the marble halls and you can't be anything other than impressed. Even 70 odd years after it was built. It's truly fantastic. So back in the 1930s, teams would have arrived there, gone into the marble halls, and think they've walked into a palace. And as you said, the facilities were fantastic. There was underfloor heating in the Arsenal dressing rooms. There was baths, and there was a big bath in the changing rooms and individual baths as well. And Tom Whittaker had a great medical room. He was into all sorts of innovative types of medicines and cures for injuries. And he had that built around what Tom Whittaker needed.
Okay. But this all came at a cost, didn't it, Andy? Because we had to borrow significantly
Very
pre-war
much so,
to
yeah.
develop the ground.
Yeah, and I think like before the First World War, when we originally moved to Highbury, we laid out a lot of money without realising what might happen in the next few years. So when we moved to Highbury, William Hall and Henry Norris borrowed a lot of money, or lent the club a lot of money, and had to do all sorts of financial deals to borrow the money to pay for Highbury originally, which they finally paid off in 1925. And then in the 30s, Arsenal, have hit a boom time. They got massive crowds come in. They were making huge profits during the 30s, and what they did was they upgraded the ground. They extended the North Bank. They built the West Stand, as we said, and then with the East Stand, it cost about 3 times as much as the West Stand. And so by the time the Second World War broke out, Arsenal were owed the Prudential, who they borrowed the money from, over £120,000, which was a huge amount of money back then. The club was probably turning over about £70,000 a year, so it's probably more than 2 years worth of their turnover. But they obviously weren't expecting the war to come along, and they were expecting the big crowds to stay there. And all of a sudden, boom, the war comes along and football stops.
So leading up to that, and leading up to the war, after Herbert Chapman, George Allison becomes the manager, 1934 to 47. He oversees us throughout the war as well. He coached us for 279 games. He won 129, drawn 74 and 76. So, he won 2 league titles, which were in, you said already, 34, 35. Well, actually, would 34, 35 be counted as his?
That was his.
Yeah, that was his.
He was there for the whole of that season.
Yeah. And then 37, 38 as well. Also won an FA Cup and a couple of charity shields along the way. Mark, what stood out about this guy as a manager? What was his qualities as a manager?
Ferg, wait a minute, Mark. Just wait a second. Ferg, I'm really sorry, mate. But there's an interesting thing here in that before Allison became secretary manager, I'd like to. What credentials did he have to be? He weren't a player of any quality at all, was he?
He was a top-notch. Sorry, he was a top-notch program editor.
Yeah, well, this is what I've heard. So how does he end up being secretary manager of the biggest football club in the United Kingdom?
Well, he started off, as Mark said, he was a journalist in the early part of the 20th century. When Arsenal moved to Highbury, he was invited to become Arsenal program editor, which he did up until 1927. And when Henry Norris, William Hall, Jack Humble, and George Peachey were kicked off the board, Arsenal needed new board members, and George Allison was invited onto the board. By which time he'd become, quite a famous journalist, and he was also a radio commentator. I'm not 100% certain why they invited him on the board, but he bought shares into the club. He became one of the biggest shareholders as well. He had about 500 shares in the club.
I think it just answered your question.
He became a director first. So he sat on the board from 1927 up until 1934, when he actually applied to become manager of the club. Now, we've looked through the club minutes, and there was a very interesting scrap of paper that was sort of like paper clipped to the back of the minute books, and on it there's not a great deal of writing, but it alludes to George Allison becoming the new manager. But what was even more interesting was, if you turn the piece of paper over, it appears to be from the order of service of Herbert Chapman's funeral.
Oh, blimey.
Oh, wow.
So I'm wondering if George Allison had it in his mind to become, or push towards becoming, the new manager, and he's thinking about it while they're seeing off Herbert Chapman. I think he, being a director, he knew all what was happening on, within the board. So perhaps he was pushing himself to become the manager of Arsenal.
Fergus, the history of our club is amazing, mate, isn't it? Some of the things we find out from talking to these two boys, it's just astonishing. Astonishing.
You know what I do?
In answer to your question,
go on, sorry.
It probably wasn't his footballing nous that got him the gig, because basically he relied on Shaw and Whittaker for the tactics, and for basically all the playing went through them. All of the coaching, everything went through them. He was the manager, as in, he was the front piece. He was out there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All the backroom boys were doing all of the football stuff. It wasn't really him, because a couple of the players complained bitterly about him not knowing anything. I can't remember who they were, but there was quite a few quotes saying he didn't know great about football. But he was relatively successful in that he knew certain things. Also, he did know the game was up when it was time to go after the Second World War, didn't he, Andy? He did.
Yep.
He did sort of, he did say straight away, one season, that's it, I'm finished. Take over, Tom.
And during the war, during the war, that old phrase from Only Fool and Horse to say, we had to move out from Highbury because Highbury became an air raid precaution. It was an ARP centre, so it had barrage balloons and anti-aircraft guns and so on. Andy, what do you know about that? And then Mark probably talk to us a little bit about us having to play our games down the road in N17. Andy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, like you say, it was taken over by the authorities. One of the big things that they did was they stored stretchers under the North Bank, which we'll probably talk about in a bit, which caused a bit of a problem. But there were some games that actually took part at Highbury during the war, and they were air raid patrol teams playing against each other. And people like Tom Whittaker played, players that hadn't been called up into the army that early, or other members of the backroom staff. So there was a few games played at Highbury, but only in the first season after the war, and they weren't official games. But they are documented by a guy called Harry Homer, who became the program editor just before the war. And so that was it, and that was actually used during air raids as well. So local people during air raids, they would come and sleep behind in the west stand behind where the seats were, in the corridors behind there. There's actually quite a good. There's a guy who works for Arsenal in the community called Samir Singh, and he put us on to a lady who actually stayed in Highbury, the stadium during the war, and she wrote quite a nice piece on a website somewhere. We'll have to dig that one out, and it tells of how the people were staying there and what was happening from day to day, and who was knocking around. One of them was George Allison. She remembers George Allison there. It's a great story.
Brilliant.
And Mark, we had to go and play down the road in N17.
We did indeed.
Many games, and probably cross-referencing that with, there were some guests because of a lot of the players at war and so on. There was some guest players that played, like Stanley Matthews, Stan Morrison, Bill Shankly, all wore the Arsenal shirt. Was that at those exhibition games that Andy was talking about at Highbury, or was that at White Hart Lane?
Basically, what they did, they played a number of cup games, war cup games, war league games. They played loads of games. Was it 50 other season? They were. And they're different leagues. It's difficult to go into it in huge depth, but they
were all regional. They were regional leagues, weren't they?
Yeah, and also they changed the setup because Allison got fed up with it and he wanted to change certain bits and pieces. But the standouts were. I was looking at this earlier. In one game, Leslie Compton, who was a centre half, was actually played centre forwards for most games. He scored 10 goals in one game. I think we won that on 15-2, wasn't it, against Clapton Orient. Yeah, I mean, there was lots of, and also a lot of Arsenal players did go up wherever they were stationed. They would have played, say, for Newcastle, for whoever else, Leeds, Man U, etc. I mean, there's a lot of, I've done a lot of work on Sunderland myself in the war, and there's quite a number of Arsenal players who played up there, purely because they were stationed there. So there's guess they wouldn't have played a lot of the games without having that facility just to play other professionals to come in, and to actually put them into the team.
So, Mark, I've got. Sorry, Fergus, I keep biting. I've got your Bible in front of me, so I could look at this, but I'm not going to be bothered. I'm going to ask you the question. But all those games played during the war years, when all those wonderful players from that period played for the Arsenal as guests, they're not recorded as Arsenal history, are they? Or is it just Arsenal war history? If I looked in your book, would I see that these lads had put in appearances for Arsenal?
No, because they're treated as a minor. They're treated as a minor competition.
Yeah.
So they're not treated as a full official game. I mean, on the website, they're on the website, aren't they, Andy? If I remember.
They are, yeah.
Yeah, on our website, all of the details of everybody who played for Arsenal is on the web. For both the First World War and the Second World War is on there. And in the complete record, we did a season, and we also mentioned people who were affected by players who were affected by the war. But we did one season per a page per season, just so that we put it right. So, because some of the seasons you can't, it's very hard to find information out because a lot of the reports just didn't. It was just a game. This was played, that was played, and other times there was a huge amount of information.
Yeah.
And
for us, during the war, for us, as Mark says, finding information was really, really difficult. There was rationing of paper, so newspapers went from being like 30 pages down to 4 pages, so they had to ration what news they could put in there, and so the football tended to be, you might get the scores recorded, so it's very, very difficult. But we do have all the lineups for all of the games, but as Mark says, they're on the website.
Yeah, which I just put.
The programs
I'll
are one
put that
sheet.
up on there, which is arsenalhistory.com. Go on, Mark. Go on.
Yeah, the programs were literally one sheet. You were lucky if you had 4 pages. Like a A4 bit folded up. Most of them were just card size with information on 2 sides, one sheet of paper on 2 sides. Not just for Arsenal, for over the whole of football.
And the paper was really thin as well. It was almost a tissue-like. So if you can get programs of good quality, you're very lucky.
And tell us this about team members that served in the war. Did many of the Arsenal players serve in the Second World War? I know we touched on some of this when we've done a general roundup of Arsenal history when we got into this. And a number of players did serve, and some came back, some didn't. Which one of you would like to take this topic up? Because I know one of you was more clued up on the war years.
That's probably more Mark's field.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, well, pretty much every single player was called up because unlike the First World War, before 1916, it wasn't a voluntary thing. You were called up. It was conscription. You were conscripted. I think Bastin didn't, but the only reason was because he was deaf. He was hard of hearing. So
what?
So he was he was excused. He was excused duties on that base. But I don't think there was any other player that didn't.
I think Ernie Collett must have had something because he played in a lot of games during the war. He played regularly, but I'm not sure what he's. Well,
maybe he was in a sec. He wasn't a fighting section. He was doing some other job. Into him every really. No, I mean there's.
Did we lose many players?
There's a lot of players. I mean, we can you can go through. You go to the list. It's on the book. It's 12, 13 people involved with the club. I'm saying 12, 13 because we found one other person.
We lost more than any other club.
Yeah, who were
Arsenal
killed.
were the hardest hit. Yeah.
And I mean, when you research it, the bit that I always find really sad is when they say how they're remembered, and almost all of them are remembered on a memorial, not being buried or cremated, because they never found their bodies. You know, naval planes, etc., falling out of the sky. It's that type of thing that really does make you think about it. You know what it must have been like for the the relatives. Just finding out. And there's nothing. There was nothing to commemorate them with, because
Mark, it's very true, and don't worry, I'm not going to politicise this. Far from it, actually. But the reason we're here now is because these people went and fought for us a long time ago, and memories are fading. But we do need to still pay our respects for them, to them, because without them, we're not about. So, yeah, I understand that memories are fading, and the kids now that they don't remember anything about it. But we do still need to remember them, because they're probably the reason why we're still here to talk now about our great football club. Anyway.
And listen, Highbury didn't come off that well either. Highbury got bombed. The Clock End got bombed in October 1940. And I found some footage which you might find interesting here, which is the Clock End in 1941. It was April 1941. Sorry, the North Bank. And this is, I shared it with the guys, and as much as they're historians and done a lot of stuff, you hadn't seen this, guys, had you, Andy?
No, not at all. So I've seen still photographs of it, but not video footage. And I mean, it shows how badly the North Bank was destroyed. Well, it was destroyed pretty much, but it wasn't actually bombs that physically destroyed it. It was incendiary devices that set fire to the stretchers that were being stored on the terraces, and then they caused such a fire that effectively the North Bank melted. The cover on the North Bank melted. So the terraces weren't affected, but the cover of the North Bank was, and it had to be destroyed, had to be pulled down. So
you could sort of see that from still, can't you, Andy? Because there's no holes in that roof. That roof was given way, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and the supports for it as well. And it's quite sad, really, isn't it? I mean, when you look at it.
Oh, unbelievable. I was just looking at that then, lads, thinking those crush barriers that were still standing around the sides there, I wonder if they were still the same ones that, I went on to lent on in the 70s, or if they had to change them all. They
might well have been. Yeah.
They look similar, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, they do, mate. Yeah, they do look similar. That's an amazing bit of footage, Fergus. You've done well there, mate.
If anybody said, listen to the audio, get yourself onto YouTube. We're 28 minutes in. Have a look at the video clip. It's really, really. And now to know that it was stretchers that were underneath the North Bank, and the heat that must have been there was unreal. I know goalposts were damaged. There was also the south stand was the south. What did I say? The south stand was damaged as well.
Yeah, there was but it wasn't like loads of damage on the Clock End. It was on the southeastern corner. And again, if you go on Google, you'll eventually find it. There's a picture of workmen working on that area. So it's towards the back end of the Clock End, or was the South Terrace as it was then. Oh no, it was the Clock End by then, wasn't it? We moved the clock there. So, but it's in like the eastern corner. So it was a training pitch, wasn't it? Yeah. After the war, that damage wasn't repaired until a couple of seasons after the war had finished. So it was all fenced off, and people still used just sort of like stood around it.
Before you come in, there was also
Fergus, I'm just going to
before you come in, there was also £1,000 bomb that hit Highbury Highbury Hill and the Arsenal tube station, and there were some workmen working around the stadium, and I believe 2 guys lost their lives there as well. So and there was lots of people. You talked about people sheltering in the West Stand for air raids and stuff. Arsenal tube station was always full of men, women, and children, or mostly women and children, of an evening. Protecting themselves from the bombs. Trev, carry on, and then we'll move past the war.
I was just going to lighten it a little bit, because I asked Mark and Andy this question before we started recording this, Fergus, didn't I? And their answer made me giggle greatly. So I'm going to ask it again for the benefit of the people listening. How on earth did the East and West Stands survive when all the damage came to the North and South Banks? How did they survive, boys?
I'm not going to say the answer that I said previously.
No, it was, what I mean. It was luck, wasn't it? It was pure
luck, yeah.
Luck. That was what I was pushing for.
I thought he was pushing me for the other answer. No, it was just pure luck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Bin Laden was a gooner, wasn't he? Apparently.
We brought it up first.
I did. Moving swiftly on.
Sorry, just before we finish on the war, actually, Arsenal had quite a fair amount of success in these regional leagues and regional cups, which you'd expect, because they were playing against lower league teams now. They're playing teams from London and the South East. So although you've got, fairly biggish teams like Tottenham and Chelsea playing in there, you've also got Watford and Brentford and Reading and a lot of lower league teams. So in the early part of the war, Arsenal actually managed to keep a lot of their big name players playing for them. There weren't that many guest players in the first 2 or 3 seasons of the war. So they were putting out, quite strong teams. And we had a real good run in those regional leagues and actually reached National Cup final as well. But from 43 onwards, a lot of the players were fighting overseas. And so that's when we started to use the guest players. And if you look at the list of players, the number of players that we used each season, it was, well into the 50s. And so players were coming in for the odd game here and there. And then that was, how we started to dip away. And by 45, 46, which was even after the war had finished, but the last season of wartime football, you could see that we had a bit of an issue there. We were finishing about midway in what was the Football League South.
Well, you know what? It's like you've done this loads of times before, Andy. I was just about to go. The conflict ended in 1945. Professional football resumed in 46. But the war left us weaker. And indeed, we were almost relegated from the top division in 1947 before rallying to 13th with 16 points behind Liverpool. Mark, that was the end of the Allison era and the start of the Whittaker era, was it?
Yeah. I mean, as I said before, that Andy said last week. I mean, the only reason that we didn't get closer to relegation was he bought Joe Mercer and Ronnie Rook, which basically sorted out the defence and the attack in one fell swoop. I mean, my dad started supporting the club at that period, that season, just after the war. And as I say, when he, I worked out because he was trying to work out his first game, and I think we were second to bottom when he first saw us. So that just shows you how what it was actually a big turnaround, really, to go. Yeah. We were in dire straits. Then Ronnie Rook came in and scored the goals. Mercer shored defence up. Everyone was happy. And then next season, Whittaker took over. A few fresh ideas. So league's won.
And we only go and win it.
Whittaker joined on the 1st of June 1947. 426 games in charge of Arsenal, won 199, drew 106, and lost 121. He did bring us some glory back. He had 1950 an FA Cup and 1953 our 6th league title. Let's talk about that FA Cup then, Andy. Smiling Joe Mercer, as you were talking about Mercer, was carried around Wembley like this with the FA Cup in hand. because it seemed to be all on him, didn't it?
Yeah, he was a truly inspirational captain. He's up there with Tony Adams and Frank McClintock. You know, he had bandy legs. He wasn't the fastest of players. He was well into his 30s by the time he joined Arsenal, but he knew how to organise the team on the pitch. That season we had a bit of a stroke of luck that we had a couple of years ago in the FA Cup, in that we were drawn at home every round. So, and also in the semi-final we played Chelsea at White Hart Lane, and in a replay again we played at White Hart Lane. So we never actually left London in winning that FA Cup. But there was one thing that started, another slide for Arsenal, unfortunately, and it probably started around about then. And it's, by 1953 we were lucky to win the league. But going back to that 1950 Cup final, Arsenal were the oldest team to win the Cup final at that point, and I think we still are. So a lot of the players, joined Arsenal before the war, or they were quite old when they joined Arsenal after the war. So the average age of the team was well over 30.
Oh, wow. Trev, this is your ticket from that day on the 29th of April 1950. You must have been, what, in your early 20s then?
I was just going to say I was 25, Fergus. Yeah, when
25, yeah.
Well, don't forget we've got to meet up again soon, mate. Moving swiftly on. The interesting thing is, boys, the war's over now, right? The North Bank's been wrecked, and there's a fund set up, isn't there, by the government and by people for rebuilding of buildings and replacement. But didn't the Arsenal have to wait a long, long time well into the reign of Tom Whittaker before they got the roof back on the North Bank? Didn't they? Either of you guys?
Yeah. It's because there's still shortage.
I think it's 1956 before it was put back up.
So 11 years after the war ended, we're still waiting for them to fix. Obviously, they'd cleared the North Bank terrace, and it was just like the same as the Clockhead, was it, Mark?
Say that again?
I say what they'd done after the war, they cleared the roof of the North Bank terrace and left it open, did they? Until we managed to find
totally empty until the start of the 56-57 season. And then sadly, a couple of months afterwards, Whittaker died.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So they put that up, and then he died a couple of months after.
So building new stands seemed to have a bad effect on the Arsenal managers then, because Chapman went before the East Stand. It's almost like a modern day open Aaron Ramsey don't score a goal.
And look at the demise of Wenger once he moved across to the Emirates. Everybody went against him then. So, yeah. Listen, 1952, we lost against Newcastle in the FA Cup final, another one of Trevor's ticket stubs. What happened in that game then? Mark, you said let's gloss over that one, but I'm not going to let you get away with that too easily. What happened in that game then? 1-0 loss to Newcastle, who won in 1952 and then won again in 1955. Such a big club in the Northeast and won nothing since.
We lost to the better team.
With 7 players.
And that's all I can say. I believe in that game, the first Chilean scored, didn't he, Andy?
Mm-hmm.
First Chilean scored in the FA. No, we were short of a number of players due to injuries and tiredness, I believe. I was trying to I think we had 7 players at the end, didn't we? 7 fit players.
Yeah.
Ray Daniel played with a cast on his arm. But I think that the big injury was Wally Barnes, who we lost quite early on
during the game, wasn't it? Yeah. And
he was injured.
So we finished with 7 players on the pitch, or there was
7 fit players. What Barnes had gone off. We actually had 10, but Logie, Daniel, and there was someone else who was really, really tired. We were, it was a bit like 11 players playing the 5, playing as 5-a-side team at the end of it.
Fergus, you're forgetting, mate. And we're going to laugh again here, but I'm deadly serious. You're forgetting, mate, that in them days, in them 1952 FA Cup final, the players were different to now. They played with a broken leg if they were allowed. They wouldn't roll on the floor and hobble around and and crawl off the pitch. You know, they're playing a game.
Well, I know that there wasn't many substitutions, and the guys will probably tell me when it was more than 2 substitutions come in, because I think there was no subs at one point, and then there was 1 sub, and then there went 2, and now we're at 5.
No subs in 1952. They didn't come in until the mid-60s. Bert Troutman played the FA Cup final with a broken neck.
He did for Manchester City. With a broken neck. He only died a couple of years ago, didn't he? Bert Troutman. Yeah, he only passed a couple of years. Played a game with a broken neck, Fergus. Can you imagine it now?
No, well, you just have to ask those Italian players. You just have to ask that Italian player who went down in the box the other day to see if he could play with a broken neck or a broken nail even. So listen, we move on to 1950.
You mean that Italian player called Sterling? Is that the Italian player you mean, mate? Is it?
No, move on. So 1953, Whittaker wins our 6th title. It was won on the 1st of May, but it was by the skin of our teeth. It was down to, they didn't have goal difference then. It was down to a ratio, wasn't it, of goal average, Andy?
That's correct. So it's goals for divided by goals against, which created all sorts of weird and wonderful, scenarios. If you think about it, early on in the season, a team could win 1-0 and they'd have a better goal average than a team that won 10-1.
Because they've conceded a goal.
It was just like something that was brought on towards the beginning of when the Football League started in the 1880s, and it continued then until like the mid 1970s. It was a really stupid way of deciding who finished above who, but it worked for us that season, so I'm not really complaining that much.
Well, we pipped Preston to the title, but was that not almost a reward for Whittaker's style of play of football? That he was very much about, we'll score, you can score 2, we'll score 3.
Yeah, which he continued on from the Chapman days. And when we spoke about before the war when we failed to replace Alex James. So the last couple of seasons before the war, we weren't playing as well as we had played before then. After the war, just before the war, we bought a player from Scotland who actually missed out on all of the missed playing for us during the wartime. Was Jimmy Logie, and he seemed to be the guy that actually did replace Alex James. And while he was there, we had a great run of success, and we scored an awful lot of goals. And he was playing in the same sort of position as a pivot as Alex James. And I would certainly say that he was the one that, along with Joe Mercer, that gave us that run of success just after the war. And once Joe Mercer finished playing, he was actually captain of the club.
Last area we're going to talk about, it's not one I've really prepared about, but it was following a message conversation between yourself, you guys, and Trevor about England internationals in the 50s. Trev, I'll leave you take this one.
Well, you're talking about the Italy game, are you, at Highbury? What was it called?
We can talk about that if you would. I'm talking about the number of internationals that and the level and the quality of Arsenal's squad at the time then.
Yeah, I think it was
never had a clue about this. Never had a clue about this. You have to be Mark and Andy that lead us through this. It's astonishing fact.
Yeah, so Trevor brought up about the Battle of Highbury, as it was, England against Italy. That was played at Highbury, and it had 7 Arsenal players started the game. And we also had Tom Whittaker was the trainer for England, which England won 3-2, and Italy were world champions at the time. So that's an incredible amount of players from one club to play for an international team. And after that, we were still getting 5 or 6 Arsenal players playing the England team. But after the war, it all fell apart. And then between 1950 and 1960, there were only 4 Arsenal players played for England.
Amazing.
Lionel Smith played 6 games, and the other 3 only managed 4 between them. So the total appearances was only 10.
So they weren't even regulars. Not even regulars.
No.
That's astonishing. 10 years, and we had 10 England appearances.
Yeah,
but one of those was Milton, wasn't it?
Yeah, Arthur Milton.
And he was the last dual international England for cricket and football.
Brilliant. I'm just curious. Neither of the Compton brothers played football for England then.
Leslie did. He was one of the Arsenal players. So he played 2 games for England.
Did he not play cricket for England then, Leslie Compton?
Oh, sorry, no, he didn't play cricket for England. No.
Really?
Yeah.
God, I'd have put my money on the fact that he did.
Yeah.
And Dennis Compton didn't play for England football. He played for cricket. He played for England in the wartime. He played for England in the wartime, but not, but he was such a good cricketer. It was,
Yeah.
So Les Compton, he made his international debut in 1950, and I think he was 38 at that time. He joined Arsenal in 1931, I think, and for many years he was said to have been the oldest player to have made his England debut. But over the last 10 years or so, someone's found another player. He was a goalkeeper back in the 1870s. It might have even been England's first goalkeeper, who was like 6 months older than Les Compton, but he's still the oldest outfield player to make his England debut. That's incredible, isn't it? 38 years old.
38 years old. Yeah.
And in his second and last appearance, he scored an own goal.
Oh, how's your luck? How's your luck? Yeah.
Guys, I really enjoyed it. I thought this was going to be a difficult era to cover because I didn't think a huge amount happened. But as I find on every one of these podcasts that we've done, I learned something new every time. And we're talking about, afterwards, I'll sit over the pub at the weekend and I'll chat to some of my mates and say, did you know? And I'll come out with some stuff and they go, where did you learn that from? And I'll go, you need to tune into this podcast. So I really do appreciate it, guys. If you do want to see more of what the guys do, look at the Arsenal history on arsenalhistory.com. Andy, Mark, go on. Leading up to the game, give us a prediction what you got for Sunday. Mark, go first.
1-0.
2.
2.
Well, it's going to be England, isn't it?
Oh,
okay, there we go. That's fine.
We're not bloody mind readers, Marcus.
If it was been Italy, I'd have said 0-1, wouldn't I?
Well, I don't know. I think England are officially the away team. So, yeah. So, Andy, what are you going for?
I can't see England beating Italy. I think it'll be 2-0 to Italy.
Okay.
Oh, I can see us winning.
I think it's going to be really tight.
As much as I'd love us to win and put 46 years of misery, since I started following football, put that behind me. I just can't see us beating Italy.
I think it's going to be tough. I do think that the Wembley crowd, it could be too much pressure, but I think it also could be when they need to dig deep. And as Delia Smith was said, let's be Avenue. I think they could be that 12th man. Trev, your prediction on the game? Bearing in mind, I got no horse in the race, have I?
To be honest, mate, I'm a bit like Andy, and to put a bit of logic to it, if you look at the Spain-Italy semi-final and you look at the England-Denmark semi-final, the standard of football, I thought it was massive difference. There was a massive difference in skills. I thought the Italy-Spain game was a much better game to watch, if I'm honest, from a football perspective. Obviously not as an Englishman, but football's football. So I'm going to go for another 1-1 win for England. I'm ready for it.
Yeah, you and Lee judges together, right? Guys, I'm going to go for. I really do want to see a party in Essex, and I am going to go for a 2-1 to England against the odds. I think it's going to be a really tough game. I'm hoping it's a 90-minute. I'm not hoping for extra time and penalties and everything else. But all I can say is best of luck, England. You got a paddy behind you. So, guys, thanks very much as always. The next episode is 1953 to 1986, leading us up through the 70s and the Bertie Mee era and George Graham captaining Arsenal.
That's going to be busy. That's going to be a busy one, Ferg.
It is indeed.
There and a double and a first European trophy to talk about. Then the double and then cup 3 years in a row cup finals. There'll be a busy one. That one. Plan for about 5 hours, lads, please.
Well, can you do me a favour? Can you do some work on it this time, please, Trev? Like you left it all down to me this time.
And what a great job you've done, Fergus. I've only had to carry you for half the show instead of normally the whole show. So you're a lucky man.
Thank you, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. You can see where you can get Andy at Gooner_AK. Mark is Royal Arsenal MRA. I'm Guns and Ribbons and Gooner Hilsey. Thanks very much. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you do, just click like, subscribe, tell your mates about it. This is Arsenal's Guns and Yellow Ribbons, an Arsenal podcast by Arsenal fans for Arsenal fans. Thanks very much, everybody. Enjoy the football.
You've been listening to Guns and Yellow Ribbons, an Arsenal podcast by Arsenal fans for Arsenal fans. Follow us on Facebook at Guns and Yellow Ribbons and Twitter at Guns and Ribbons. And remember to rate and review us too.